Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my part 3 of my 3-part series all about decision fatigue at meal times. And so for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jennifer Cohen. I am the fussy eating doctor, and I help busy and frustrated families like you have calmer and happier meal times with your fussy eaters. So as I said, today I'm going to do a 3rd part in this series all about decision fatigue. Now, for those who haven't seen my series yet about decision fatigue, what I've been talking about is the fact that for some of us, or in fact a lot of us, when we get to meal times, especially in the evenings, it's really, really hard to make decisions about what we're going to feed our family and ourselves. And this is actually known as decision fatigue. So what that means is that when you have been making lots of small decisions throughout the day, whether you're at home with your kids, at work, or doing both, you make tiny little decisions throughout the day, and these add up. And then over time, you actually become fatigued from making decisions. And what your body naturally will do is go for the easiest decision. And sometimes that's not the most sensible. And so when it comes to meal times, if we haven't decided what we're going to have for dinner and then we come to an evening meal, we're likely to make a decision that's not necessarily going to be, I guess, always the best decision for the family. I guess not always the healthiest or the best choice. And in the second part, I talked about the fact that to sort of combat this, that's where things like meal planning is so important. And not meal planning in the evening, but meal planning, even if it's just in the morning, when you're feeling freshest and more likely to make better decisions, is so important. But in this 3rd part, I want to really focus on fussy eaters. And that's because obviously that's what I talk about a lot, is fussy eaters. And for you guys out there who have got fussy eaters, being aware of decision fatigue at meal times and preparing for meal times is actually more important than if you don't have a fussy eater. And I know you're probably rolling your eyes going, oh, not another thing. We already have stressful meal times. But hear me out, because I'm actually going to give you ways of helping to help with choices at meal times and why planning for meals with a fussy eater is even more important. Now, a couple of things that we talk about with fussy eaters to get them ever wanting to try new foods is, one, they still need to try and have a variety of foods. I know that's hard because with a lot of fussy eaters out there, over time, they tend to eat less and less food. And foods that they used to like, they sometimes get to the point where they reject. And this is called a food jag. So a food jag is where you've had the same food over and over again and you get sick of it and all of a sudden you don't like it. Now, for most of us, that probably happens to us now and again. But when you eat a wide variety of foods, it really doesn't matter. But when you're a fussy eater and you've already got a limited diet, food jagging or starting to reject foods that you like is even harder, because it means it closes up how many foods that your child will actually eat. And so to combat this is make sure that your child is getting variety even amongst the foods that they do eat, which means if the only vegetable they like is carrots, avoiding serving carrots every single day, or making sure you serve it in a different format. So instead of rounds, it's in sticks. And I've got a blog post that talks about this. But with fussy eaters, they do need to make sure they have variety even in their limited diet to prevent this food jagging. And the second thing about fussy eaters is there is a lot of steps that you need to take to get your fussy eater trying new foods, and it's a very long process. But one of the most important steps is your fussy eater is never going to want to try new foods if they're not exposed to these new foods. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, the right way of doing it. But the thing is, if your fussy eater is not exposed to these new foods, then they're never going to try it. But then how does this relate to decision fatigue? Well, think about it. If you haven't planned your day, and you haven't planned your meal times, and you get to the evening and the kids are screaming, you've had a big day with them and you're crazy and you can't be bothered making a decision, you're going to go with the easiest decision. And the easiest decision when you've got fussy eater, 1 or 2 or maybe more, is choosing a food that you know that they're going to eat. And so then you tend to stick with the same meals over and over again. And over time, if your child is getting the same meals, they're more likely to get rejected or, get sick of it. And secondly, you're not exposing them to new foods. And if you don't expose them to new foods, then they are never, ever going to get comfortable with trying new foods. So again, the thing about this is, with decision fatigue, is that we know for fussy eaters that it's so important that you plan your meals. And the reason for this is, like I said, is you want to make sure your fussy eater's getting a variety of foods and that they're exposed to new foods. But what I don't want you guys doing then is going, okay, I'm just going to give them whatever we're going to eat or whatever we're enjoying. Because the thing about fussy eaters, if you give them a meal that only has foods, like has no foods that they like, so say it's a completely new meal with no foods that they're familiar with and they like, then this is likely to cause a meltdown at meal times. And I'm sure some of you have witnessed this before, is putting a whole new meal on the plate because you're just sick of cooking the same foods over and over, and your child has a meltdown. And I've talked about this before, but if your child is stressed at meal times, they're never going to want to try new foods because their appetite is likely to decrease from a high level of stress hormones. So I'm not saying that you should be putting completely new meals on the plate, but this is where it's so important for parents of fussy eaters, is that every meal you should always have, say, foods that they like, but always have one new or slightly challenging food on the plate. And this is where the exposure comes in. And that's why for parents of kids who are fussy eating, meal planning is even more important, because not only do you need to think about the foods that you know your fussy eater's going to like and eat, but you also need to think about the foods that you're going to expose them to at each meal. And I have a story about my kids. So my eldest was actually originally my least fussy kids, but since he's turned like almost 6, he's getting fussy, or he just likes certain things. And so tonight we had a meal that I know my kids have not always been great about. It's nothing exciting. It's just like a pasta with zucchini and tomato. And individually I like the ingredients, but when I put them together, especially my oldest doesn't really enjoy it. And so what I always do when I try introducing a meal that I know they're not necessarily enthused about is I'll always have something with it. So I'd always serve some salad, veggie sticks, because my eldest will eat those with the meal. And so what I've already planned in my head is, okay, well, we're going to have a meal that my kids are less likely to eat, but I'm also going to know what's going to be on the plate that they are going to eat. And when I'm actually meal planning, I have to think about this sometimes. And I don't even have the fussiest of kids. But again, it's about having to plan out those days. And if you leave it till the evening to make those decisions about what you're going to feed you and your family and your fussy eater, then what happens is you're not necessarily going to make the better choice. You're going to make the easiest choice. And the easiest choice is always going to be the foods that you know your fussy eater is going to like, and you're not likely to expose them to those new foods. And that's why meal planning is actually even more key to the fussy eaters. Now, for parents of fussy eaters. Now, as I said in video 2, and I talk about this even more, it doesn't mean that you have to plan out your whole week of meals, but in the morning, when you're fresh and you haven't made any decisions yet, and you're feeling a lot calmer and a lot less fatigued, even if you in the morning go, this is what we have for dinner, I know we've got these ingredients, these are the foods that I know my fussy eater does like, and this is the more challenging food. And you need to do that at least for every meal, or most meals. And so even if you think about it in the morning before your day starts, because if you leave it till you get home at night, then it's going to make it harder to make those decisions. And like I said about fussy eaters, you can't fix things or change things overnight. It's about doing the same things over and over, keeping a stress-free meal, having family meals together, giving them foods that you know they like in combination with a new food that you're going to expose them to. Now, I've talked about this in other blog posts, but if you've got a kid who is really, really, really stressed at meal times and you put a new food in front of them and they go crazy, then that new food doesn't have to be on their plate. It can be on a tasting plate or a learning plate that I've talked about before. But again, with fussy eaters, you do need to plan. And that's where I find that decision fatigue is really, really important and ties in really, really nicely with fussy eating. So really what I want you guys to do and to take from this decision fatigue series, and I hope you've enjoyed it, is to be aware that it is something that we get, and I get it. And as I said in video 1 is don't always ask your kids what they want, because again, that's the easy option and you're not going to get an answer that you want, because they're less likely to give you an idea of what you want them to have. So be aware of decision fatigue. Try and plan your meals as much as you can, either in advance by a week, even by a day, even in the morning. And be aware as your day goes on, your ability to make decisions and make the better decisions, and it fatigues over time and you're less likely to make those decisions. And if you've got a fussy eater, you need to make sure that you're not only giving them a food that you know that they're more likely to eat so they don't get stressed, but then you're also giving them a challenging food either on their plate, on the learning plate, so they are being exposed to new foods, and ensuring that they're getting a variety of foods, because if they get the same meal day in, day out, they're likely to one day not want that food. So I hope you've enjoyed this series on decision fatigue. I have to say it was a revelation for me when I read about this being a thing. And I would love to hear if any of this sort of makes sense to you, or, even let me know how you plan your meals or plan your weeks. And again, it doesn't have to be every week, but even if it's in the morning, so you plan your day. So thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share with any of your friends if you think they have fussy eaters or they suffer from decision fatigue. And I will catch you guys next week with a new topic all about kids' nutrition. So have a great evening and I'll see you later. Bye.